this start and make it happen. So officially I'd like to welcome Beck Fitzpatrick and Jen York from Storyflight. So they are an amazing, is it a dynamic duo or is there more of you?
There's more of us, but yes, we're the kind of the beginning, I suppose.
Oh, lovely. So Beck and Jen started out as park rangers and parading pythons and possums around and helping. Am I getting this right? So they've known each other for quite a while, and they've worked with a number of non-profits in copywriting. I'm not going to stuff up any more of their their bio, and I might just throw to them. So welcome, Beck and Jen.
Thank you. Thank you, Bruce. I'm just going to share my screen. Let me know if there's any issues there.
Looks great.
Thanks everybody for joining us really early this morning. Hope you've got a coffee in hand. I'm Beck Fitzpatrick, and as Bruce has covered, I'm joined by Jen York. We're the managing directors here at Storyflight, which is a communication studio in Brisbane. And I thought, even though Bruce has covered a little bit of our story, I'd share a little bit about who we are. So both Jen and I come from a corporate communications background. We've spent over 10 years working on marketing and communication for Queensland Parks and Wildlife Service. Hence, if you heard our brief little interlude with pythons and possums. But one of the things that we learned during that time was how communication can be used not only to provide information, but to create a real impact. Like to affect someone in a way that changes what they think and will do next. And so over the last 4.5 years, I think it's been as Storyflight, we've been bringing this approach to our work with for-purpose businesses and not-for-profits. We've worked more recently with brands that are focused on conservation, cultural heritage protection, disability care, aged care, renewable energy, and mental health. And so we're really excited to be talking to you about the topic of writing for impact this morning. And we hope that you can pick up something new that you can implement in your own communication. I'm going to be co-presenting and driving the slideshow today, so please excuse if there are any long pauses. Before we dig in, I want to briefly touch on the role that communication can play in the not-for-profit sector. I think it's really important that right now to recognise that the current crisis has created an even more challenging fundraising landscape, and not-for-profits are having to think really differently about how they raise money, grow their donor base, and keep their brand top of mind and relevant. It's a really competitive market and a time when building trust is so important. So one of the ways that your organisation can lead the way through this change is through your communication. Communication has the power to build awareness for your cause and strengthen your brand. It can build trust, authority, and credibility. It can inspire, support, and action. It can nurture your community and guide the donor and stakeholder journey, and it can support your service delivery. It can do some really heavy lifting for your organisation's brand awareness and fundraising efforts, especially if you are writing for impact. So what are we talking about when we say writing for impact? We're really talking about writing with purpose and intent. It's about planning. Because truthfully, you can't write well without doing that strategic work beforehand. So what we'd like to share with you today is an overview of our approach to this at Storyflight. We've only got 1 hour, I think, and this is a really big topic, so we're going to try and cover as much as we can. But if we speed through some areas, and just please jot down some questions and we'll try and answer them at the end. So we're going to focus on 4 main steps The first step is discovering how we can align our communication with our goals. We'll then look at how we can demonstrate our impact and value. Next, we'll look at how we can decide the most effective way to reach our audience. And finally, we'll look at how we deliver content to achieve maximum impact. So I'm going to throw you over to Jen now.
All right. I'm going to just talk through the first step that Beck just mentioned, which is discovery. And in this step, we're thinking in detail about the context of our communication, because that helps us write in a way that's relevant and compelling. So whenever we're writing, we always start with an understanding of three things: the target audience, the communication goals, and the value that the organisation delivers, which is pretty closely linked to the purpose or the impact that an organisation creates. So we often talk about these things at quite a high level, which could be across an entire brand or organisation. But you can actually talk about them in more detail, thinking specifically about a work team, a campaign, or a single communication product. Now, because today we're going to be talking mostly about writing for impact, we're going to explore how audience goals and value affects campaigns or even a single piece of communication. So when we think about goals, we're thinking about what the communication really needs to achieve. So we ask ourselves, what is the desired outcome? The goal might be to raise a certain amount of money to fund research. It might be to increase the number of regular givers, or just to raise awareness of a brand or a cause. Once we've thought about this, we go a bit deeper, because we want to be sure that the outcomes we're looking at support an organisation's broader visions and goals. So if we're given a goal of producing a newsletter every quarter, then it's really important that we understand how that regular communication ties in with the broader organisational goals. We also ask what the specific action is that they would like the reader to take after looking at that communication. So should they go somewhere else and learn more, sign a petition, buy something, donate, or the communication might have a different purpose. We ask what the targets are for that action, and how are we going to know if the communication was successful? Because when we think about how you could evaluate those results, it helps us get a little bit clearer and more specific with our goals. And by understanding all of these things, it's easier to focus on the most important things for success. That's important because the more you start thinking about the context of communication, the more complicated it can feel. So I'm sure that most people listening are pretty comfortable with thinking about their target audience, but I'm going to talk about it a little bit today because it's just so important when we're writing. Understanding your target audience in the best way that you can is really the key to writing content that's relevant, personalized, and more engaging. And those are all things that you need to achieve if you're going to have impact. Often, the target audience is a very long list of different kinds of people, but your target audience really can't be everyone. Donors, volunteers, advocates, partnering agencies, clients, they're all different audiences with different motivations, different needs and interests. So we need to go beyond demographics and think deeply about who we're talking to. So we think about like the concerns and the challenges that an audience is facing, what's motivating them, why are they here? Are they looking for information, for support, training, or a sense of community and purpose? We also think about the experiences or expectations they've already have that are related to the cause. We think about what's going to help them connect emotionally to communication, and what sort of information might they need to reassure them, or what could inspire them. What do they already know? And are there any misconceptions or objections that you need to help them overcome? And of course, why should they care? We ask, what's in it for them? So as you're thinking about your audience, you can bring together the things that you already know within an organisation, things that are known by the comms team or the fundraising team. Then you can also talk to other parts of the organisation and get insights from places like a customer service team. You might decide to send out surveys to clients and donors, to interview specific stakeholders, to ask for feedback through social media or at events. You might conduct focus groups, access insights that are published by market research companies, or you can look at the comments and the content that's being created by users on internet forums and social media. That's obviously a pretty big list, and you're not going to do all of these things all the time. But if you don't do them ever, then you're going to be working off assumptions. Now, it's really common to have multiple audiences for a single piece of communication. And in that case, we often need to prioritise who it's most important to speak to. It is sometimes possible to write content in a way that's relevant to all the different audiences. And other times there's an option to modify the content so that something slightly different is shared with each audience. But if those things aren't possible, then there needs to be some choices made about who the writing is for first and foremost, because if you don't do that, it becomes really difficult to make the writing clear and relevant. Now, the last thing that we think about at this phase is the value that we're offering and how this connects with our audience. So you'll often hear this spoken about and called a value proposition, and it ideally is going to capture what makes what you do different, and it's framed in a way that's relevant and responds to the pain points or concerns of your audience. Getting really clear on this also helps make it easier to create impact with your writing. Someone who's new to your brand definitely wants to understand the value that you offer, but even people who are already familiar with who you are and what you do, they need to be reminded about how you're making a difference, because it helps re-engage their interest and recommit them. You can't take it for granted that the reader shares your passion for your purpose, of course. They might have a different understanding of the issues, or they might not be convinced that your solution or response is the most effective. And this leads us to thinking a bit more about the audience's pain points. And what I'm talking about there are the doubts or the beliefs or concerns that the audience has about what you're offering. So as an example, people might think, I believe in the cause, but I don't know where my money will end up. Or I want to help people, but is this the best answer to the problem? You could probably brainstorm 100 of these kinds of questions. And once you understand the pain points, there's an opportunity to address them in your value proposition and messaging so that you're responding. It also helps you write in a way that's really focused and compelling. So at Storyflight, when we think about a value proposition, we actually just start by listing the key elements that need to be included. And these are the things that we've uncovered by asking ourselves those questions about what the offering is, how that compares to competitors, and what the audience is looking for. So I thought that it would help if we shared an example that we've worked on to help make this a little bit clearer. So this is a list of the elements of the value proposition for a program called Solar Schools. So these are the things that we identified about Solar Schools. So it's an educational program underpinned by unique technology. It provides interesting, exciting resources to help children learn about sustainability. It's easy for teachers. Everything is ready to use off the shelf. And the program can create an impact in the school, as well as empowering students to create impact in the future. So some of the projects we work on also need that value proposition to be written in a prettier format for marketing. That's something we do later in the process, but to give you an idea of how that kind of list can be transformed into a piece of marketing copy, this is the value proposition on the Solar Schools website. Inspired energy education with impact. Solar Schools makes it easy and exciting to teach students about energy efficiency. Use your school's own energy data to bring this, oh gosh, it's really tiny on my screen, innovative educational program to life. That's what having too many windows open. So this version captures the benefits and the features that are likely to resonate with the teacher. It's inspirational, easy and exciting. And it also mentions using the information from your own school. And that's specifically mentioned because that's one of the things that makes Solar Schools different and unique to competitor offerings. Now, obviously, we don't always need to write a polished version of value proposition. So often the dot points are enough for us to keep moving forward with our writing process. I think it might sometimes be a bit tempting to skip over the value proposition and think that you can just move on without it. And that would leave you thinking mostly about your communication goals and your target audience. But missing that step, what you're risking is at an organisation, the organisation itself, it looks less relevant and less credible. It also makes it more likely that the writing later is going to be a little bit waffly, vague and unclear. We're also going to use the value proposition a bit later to help shape our key messages, so that's important. So I guess what I'm saying is that all three things, your value proposition, your goals and your audience, should be considered early in a project, and it's just as risky to overlook your goals or your audience. If you forget about your goals and you focus on your audience and your value proposition, you actually might write something pretty amazing, but you don't know whether it's actually supporting your organisation's goals, and you might not be able to demonstrate a return for those efforts. And of course, if you don't think about your audience and you focus very much on your own goals and value proposition, then it's pretty likely that the communication will seem a bit inwardly focused, and it will be harder to support engagement, action or conversion because it's not clearly relevant to the reader. So regardless of how noble the cause, if we're not talking in a way that really resonates with the audience, everything that gets said is falling on deaf ears.
Okay, so now that we really understand the context of our communication, the next step that we consider is how we can demonstrate impact and value. Demonstrating impact is critical, especially for not-for-profits. It can help rally support for a cause and support around your organisation's mission and work. It can help reassure donors and volunteers that their time and money is being well spent. It can shed light on the human connections that are giving your cause meaning and urgency. And it can captivate, motivate, and inspire people to action. Impact can be demonstrated using statistics and metrics, but what I want to talk about today is how you use communication to demonstrate impact. How emotional human stories are going to help support your statistics and give some context to and meaning to what you're actually achieving. We've all heard a lot about storytelling. It's a bit of a buzzword, but the truth is stories work. Our brains are chemically wired to respond to stories, which makes it a really powerful tool. You can infuse stories with anger, empathy, sadness, joy, any emotion that is going to create a connection between your audience and your organisation. And it's through this connection that you'll hopefully be able to drive a specific behavioural change or action. So what makes a good story? Firstly, stories need to have emotion. You want your story to take people on a ride where they can experience the story's conflict, escalation, and climax for themselves. It's actually been proven that stories with that dramatic arc create a heightened empathetic response in the reader, which means they become more invested in what's going to happen next and whether there's a role that they can play in that resolution. The second thing is, for a good story, is for there to be authenticity. So nowadays, people are very aware of when they're being sold something. So if your story is too perfect or it's a little far-reached, your readers simply won't believe you, or they'll feel like they can't relate to you. So you want your stories to be honest about your successful outcomes, but also your challenges, because this shows that you're a credible and relatable brand, and it's going to keep people listening when you have things to say. Lastly, your stories need to show how your organisation and your donors are making a difference. Donors can feel nervous about their investment, so you want your stories to show how their contribution is helping to accomplish things. And you want them to feel really proud of their involvement, so they'll go and share this story with other people. Now, stories don't have to be long. They can be any size, really, to have an impact. You can have small snippets of content that you might share in appeal letters, thank you letters, or social posts. or you can have short stories that you'll include in a monthly newsletter or a blog post. Or if you have the time, you can invest in writing case studies or articles for your quarterly magazine. But the more you can tell and share stories, the more your impact will be known. Where do good stories come from? A lot of our clients feel that finding stories month after month is really overwhelming, but it doesn't have to be. Ultimately, it takes a group effort. It's a responsibility that needs to be shared across all the teams in your organisation. If everyone has an awareness of why your organisation needs stories, from appealing to your donors through to nurturing partnerships, then you'll find that an internal culture of storytelling will slowly develop, and then it won't be as much effort. But some of the ways that might work for you are to try and get in the habit of recognising stories in your daily work. So think about what's happened in your day and what you go home and tell your friends and family. You can also use your team's social catch-ups as an opportunity to share stories from the week, or you could host a monthly meeting and bring together people from different teams and get them to share recent accomplishments and challenges. You could visit a community event where you know your supporters come together and interview them like a journalist would. Or you could get a professional facilitator to run a storytelling workshop for your staff and board members. One really valuable way to collect stories is to find your brand storytellers. So these are the supporters, donors, staff, volunteers, or beneficiaries who are deeply connected to your mission and feel really comfortable sharing their experiences. Now that we've looked at how you can demonstrate impact, another important step to consider is how we can demonstrate value. So, like any other business, you need your donors to continue investing in your organisation. But if you want your donors to value what you offer, you need to focus on what you can give them in return. Donors want to be reassured of the valuable role that they play, and they want to be rewarded. Donor-focused stories and content is a really great way to do this. It helps shift the focus away from you and back onto them, away from asking to giving, which is really important because so many donor interactions involve asking them for something, whether it's money, time, energy. So if you have the opportunity, consider how your communication can offer more value to the donor. Some of the ways that you can do this are solving their problem. So rather than telling them more about your organisation and what you do, is there helpful content that you could share that answers their questions or resolves their challenges? This might be a top tips list or a how-to video. Another way is to treat your donor as a true participant. So this is about giving them opportunity to share their experiences and provide input. Are there ways that you could make your donors feel a little bit more a part of the story? Another way to offer value is to make it easy for people to take further action. We see this a lot, but it's important to help donors who are interested in stepping up their involvement by making it clear what they need to do next and making sure that they feel welcome and really supported in that process. And lastly, help your donors connect better with your organisation. So use your communication as a way to highlight all of the shared values between you so that you create a sense of community. Communication is a way you can build relationships, and that's why it's really important that it's not only about money or about a single transaction, when you could be using it over and over to develop really passionate supporters who will eventually transition into major gifters or bequesters.
Now, so far, we've thought about the context of our communication, and we've also talked a little bit about how we look at demonstrating or proving an impact and offer extra value to the reader. So one of the things that I would like to talk about now is just how we make a decision about the best way to reach our audience. And often, in reality, that starts with people choosing between a print product or a digital product. And I mean, let's be honest, at this point, a lot of the time the decision's already been made, possibly way back when the project was first proposed and approved. But after all of this deep thought has been put into the context of the project, it's a really good idea to just check that you're moving forward with the right product. So what you choose obviously is influenced by your communication goals and the audience, and also things that are practicalities like your budget, the timeframes you've got to get it all together, and any of the technical capabilities that you have. I know that in the past, people often said things like, my audience prefers print or can only be reached online. But it's important to remember that the way we consume information, for all of us, it's changed dramatically over the last 15 years. So ideas like that can really easily be outdated. So if you're weighing up digital against print, here are just a few things that you might keep in mind, because it's true that digital communication does have a lot of advantages. One is the reach that you can achieve, because there's potential for what you're working on to be seen by anyone, anywhere. But at the same time, you'll also need to have a really clear plan about how that content is going to be distributed if you actually want it to be seen at all. So will it get shared by email or by social media, online ads? Is there budget available for that? Another one of the big advantages of digital is the potential that you have to really tailor the reader's journey and the content that they see so that you can create different experiences for different audiences. Digital also gives your audience and community a chance to help you spread the word if your content is easy to share. So people might like to forward an email, like and share a social post, or just send a link to someone. Something else to remember is that digital communication makes it possible to collect really helpful data in a cost-effective and streamlined way. So you can track the next step that the reader takes after they see your content, which can help you assess how effective it is. And in some cases, not all, digital content can also be faster to publish and easier to update. The comment I would make though is that all of the advantages are limited by the technical capabilities of your website and your email marketing software. And of course, with increased capabilities come increased costs. All in all, I'd say that the advantages of digital really depend on your ability to create and publish content that's well written, well designed, and supports the user journey. That's not necessarily easy. And it's why you'll often see organisations compromise and they create the same product for print and digital. And that's usually something that's designed in A4 format so that it's suitable to print or to publish online as a PDF. But the last thing I would say about this is also that sometimes the value of a print product is underestimated, because print products can now feel really quite unexpected and unusual. Mail's a bit more exciting. Perhaps not packages, we get a lot of packages. So a print product can be something tangible to hold and keep, and it feels different from the overwhelming sea of online information. A print product grabs your attention when you first see it, and then it can prompt you to look again later, to read further, think more, and take action. There is one other thing to keep in mind though when you're making decisions about the type of product that you're creating. And this is the fact that a lot of projects and campaigns do involve more than one product or piece of communication. So if you're working on multiple things at the same time, it's really important to consider how they're all connected. So will each piece of communication stand alone so that each gives the audience all the information that they need in one place? And when you choose this approach, what happens is each product shares similar information and there's a bit of repetition and reinforcement that helps make the message more memorable. The other way that those products can work together is fitting together, creating something like a digital marketing funnel so that one piece of communication leads to the next. So that might look like emails and social media ads that lead to a landing page and encourage the person to sign up. And then after that, there might be a series of other emails or ways to share or retargeting. When you're working in this way, you're able to introduce information more slowly so that you're providing the right information at the right point of the audience journey. So through this approach, you take the audience on a journey of increasing awareness, deepening their understanding and interest with each step. So If you came here today hoping for a really clear-cut recommendation about which tactic is actually better, I know that I've probably disappointed you because I don't really have a single answer to that question. So now we're getting really close to writing our communication as we move on to our delivery step. And it probably feels like there was a lot of work needed to get to this point, and that's actually true. But all that work pays off now, because now we're not facing a blank document, just waiting and hoping for inspiration. There's a lot of different ways to write, so we're not going to talk about that creative process step by step. But instead, with the time we've got left, we'll focus on key messaging, content structure, tone of voice, and improving readability, because these are all things that help us write for impact. I'm going to talk a little bit more about our key messages. So key messages describe the most important information that you want your audience to understand. We can write them now, or they could also be written a little bit earlier at the end of the discovery phase. Some key messages are designed to provide information or meaning, and others are designed to change attitudes or behaviours. And key messages can relate to things like who you work with, the problem you solve, your offering and how you deliver it, the results you achieve, and what makes you different from competitors. Just like with our value proposition, defining our key messages helps us write in a way that's clear, consistent, and relevant. The key messages also promote your purpose and value, and they're framed in a way that resonates with the challenges, values, and emotions of your target audience. So I guess what I'm saying is that the key messages do build on the value proposition. They capture more detail, and they also uncover how all the ideas fit together to build understanding. So we thought that we'd share the format that we often use to document key messages. And depending on what we're working on, there might be one key message, or there might be more, sometimes 7 or 8. Generally, a key message and a supporting message are written to be as simple and as short as possible. But the most important thing is that the way they're written has to communicate a meaning that we want our audience to understand. So it's not a statement of facts or data. Sometimes we do need to show how facts, data, or details are linked to messages. So we'll list them under the supporting messages, but we're careful to only include the details that do prove and support that message. Once those are written, we sometimes find, or we hope to find, that there's similarities between the key messages and the value proposition, which is really good because we want those things to support each other and not create contradictions. If there do seem to be some things that are contradictions or a misalignment, then there's probably something not quite right there and they need to be checked again. So if you're not sure what your key messages are or should be, the easiest way to start thinking about it is to try finishing a sentence that starts with, "The point I'm trying to make is," or "After you've read or heard this, I hope you understand that." That's often what we do when we're speaking. We sort of tell a bit of a story, and then at the end of it, we reframe it and we actually capture what we're really trying to say. So your key messages help you focus and they structure your writing, but that doesn't mean they're going to be written word for word every single time. They're written in a lot of different ways. You reframe them and reinforce ideas across different products and channels so that you're adapting the key messages for different contexts and audiences. Our next step in writing is to visualize how we're going to structure or lay out the content on a page or a screen. So sometimes a layout could be entirely in narrative style, such as writing a fundraising letter. Often we use a more structured approach that has things like subheadings, lists, flowcharts, video, infographics, and so on. And this is the approach you often see in digital products like a campaign landing page, but sometimes also in a printed product like a case for support. And with a layout or approach in mind, we start to prepare an outline of the content. And this is where our key messages help, because we're going to think again about the information and how it all fits together. We look at that hierarchy of what's most important and what order should we be presenting information in to make it as effortless as possible for the audience to absorb what's being said. And how can the structure of information help a reader who likes to skim so that they're not overlooking key points? And like I said, keeping our key messages in mind also helps us focus on what's most important. We're all busy, and we just have to remember that the reader probably is too. So it's often a good idea to summarize the most important messages quite succinctly towards the beginning of the writing, or you can write in a way that gives the reader an idea about what's coming so they know why they should read on. Sometimes it can be a little bit tempting to be coy in our writing, to try and create some intrigue or curiosity to keep people reading. And it is true that often we need a little bit of a creative approach to draw people in. But if you're too cryptic, you also risk losing your audience's attention if they can't really quickly see why this is actually relevant to them.
Okay, so with an outline in front of you, you are now ready to think about how you'd like your writing to sound. The way that you talk to your supporters will definitely influence the way they feel about your organisation and the cause that you represent. Your tone of voice helps everyone in your organisation speak with the same voice, which creates a consistent customer experience. It helps build rapport with your audience so that they're more receptive to your messaging, and it strengthens your brand by differentiating you from other organisations and helping to build brand recognition. Now, your tone of voice should definitely capture the personality of your brand, but it also needs to consider the audience that you're talking to and what they need from you. So, for example, you might have a core brand voice of professional, humble, and informative that you apply universally to all of your communication. But for your donor audience, your tone of voice may also be passionate and motivating to help build extra interest in your cause. Or if you're talking to your clients or the people that you serve, your tone of voice may be gentle and empathetic because you want to demonstrate extra sensitivity. Every organisation should have a tone of voice guide because it helps everybody speak and write in the same way. And being consistent is what's going to help make your organisation look distinctive and credible and trustworthy. So let's take a look at an example of how tone of voice can influence your writing. Most of you are probably familiar with Charity Water. And Charity Water describes their personality as helpful, optimistic, honest, adventurous, generous, grateful, creative, and respectful. So to capture this personality and to connect with their key audience, they've created a tone of voice that is inspirational, exciting, and direct. And the direct part of their tone of voice helps them sound transparent, which is something that they firmly believe in and demonstrate a lot in their actions and communication. It also helps them write in a way that's clear and simple so that everyone can understand, whether it's their biggest campaigners or a 10-year-old wanting to, raise money. And so if we take a look at some of their communication, we can see how this tone has been used to create a real feeling of positivity and promise. They make it really clear to the reader that they're wanting to build a community of world changers. Their writing is invitational and it makes fundraising sound fun and easy, exciting. Their word choice also aligns with their tone of voice. So they use words like unstoppable and celebrate and possibility. And all of that helps to capture their optimism. So that's one example of why it's really important to get your tone right, because it will affect every choice you make about words, grammar, structure, personality. Yeah. So now that we've established a tone of voice that we know will connect with our audience, we also need to look at ways to make our writing more readable and accessible. Jen touched on this before, but it's important to remember that your audience is maybe time poor, or they are impatient, or they're simply unwilling to read what you have so lovingly put together. In fact, skim reading has become the new normal, and a lot of people now just word spot and browse content. So even if your communication has strong key messaging and it's demonstrating impact and value, if the size and the layout is overwhelming, it's likely it's not going to get read. It's also important to recognize that some of your audience may have difficulties reading or understanding content. So it's important to keep this in mind when you write, to make sure that everyone who you're trying to reach can access your information. So I thought I'd share some of the ways that we make our content more readable and accessible. And one of the ways is to keep your content simple and snappy. This means using shorter paragraphs and sentences, line breaks and bullet point lists to break up your copy into smaller bite-sized chunks. One good tip is look for where you have multiple commas in a sentence. If you've got more than one, you can consider breaking that sentence with a full stop and making it into 2 shorter ones. So here's an example of a sentence that was particularly long. It is absolutely essential that we support our clients during this incredibly difficult time and reflect on what would matter the most to them so that we can provide the assistance they need. And when we've made some changes to it to make it a little tighter, you can see it reads, "It's essential we support our clients during this difficult time. Together, we can provide help that's needed." By shortening the copy, you can see which version is easier to read. Another way that you can make your content more readable is to use plain language. So it's really tempting to sometimes write with the most impressive word choices, but honestly, most people read at a much lower grade level than we think. So this means you need to use everyday words, more common words that your audience is going to understand the first time that they read them. And it's important to try not to use jargon or industry speak because it's likely that your audience will have absolutely no idea what you're talking about. So if you're going to do that, you need to look at ways that you can provide a definition in an easy way, but most of the time it's best to leave it out. Ideally, you want your content to be readable between 7th to 9th grader or lower. So here's an example of a sentence that we made some changes to. Research has demonstrated that eating additional whole grains may contribute to the reduction of cancer and diabetes. It doesn't sound too bad as a sentence, but by removing some of the more difficult words, demonstrated becomes shows and more instead of additional. And we also have reduced some of the clunkiness with contribute to the reduction, which is may reduce the risk. You can see it's much easier to read. You can also use personal pronouns like you and we. These words sound a lot more human than saying the customer or donors. So in this sentence, it read, donors should complete the form and send it back to the fundraising team by April 15th. And you can see how much warmer it is if you say send your completed form back to our team by April 15th. But it's also clearer. And here are some other tips to improve your readability. Don't be scared to use conjunctions at the start of sentences. So these are words like and but. Oh, I've just seen the slides wrong. Sorry, everyone. I'll fix that for you before we send it out. Many people feel a little bit uncomfortable about using and but at the beginning of sentences, but it is 100% okay, and it makes it more conversational and creates a nicer flow between your sentences as well. Use contractions like it's instead of it is or we're instead of we are, because this helps the copy feel more warm and conversational as well. Use meaningful headings and subheadings to make it easy for your reader to find what they're looking for. And you can also put important concepts in bold or a breakout box, because this will help people who are scanning that high level information at least get the gist of what you're trying to say. One of the tools that we use regularly is the Hemingway app. This is an online tool where you can paste in your text and it will tell you where you can make improvements for readability that are very similar to the tips that we've provided today. So those are the 4 stages that we use to create content that will have an impact. The writing process can feel sometimes really daunting and overwhelming, but the truth is the impact that you create with your communication isn't about creative writing. It's actually all of that strategic work that you do before you start writing, understanding the context, deciding on a strategy and planning out your approach. And when you do all of these things first, your writing's going to feel a lot more simple, easy, and faster. But most importantly, it's actually going to achieve the outcome that matters. Thank you so much for joining us today. And thanks, Bruce, for inviting us to share some tips with your community. I'm going to pop the presentation back over to you.
Excellent. Thank you so very much, Beck and Jen. That was just incredible. We haven't had any questions come through yet because I think your content was just so rich, and there's so many takeaways there. So we have recorded today, and we'll get these slides out to everyone so that everyone can mull over them. But we can tell how much effort you put into that. It was just fantastic. We've got a question from Jim. Let's have a look here. Do you think it's worth avoiding our and we where possible and maximising the use of you and your to make comms as donor-centric as possible?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's a common mistake that it's really easy to make, is when you're trying to explain what you do, who you are, and create that, I suppose, sense of bit of relevance to who you're talking to. You spend a lot of time using the words we and our, and it's so important to make any reader, whether they're a donor or not, any reader feel like you're actually speaking directly to them and answering their questions, solving their problems. So even something like an about page, Jen and I will always advocate for making the about page not about the organisation. It's about 10% about you and 90% about what you're doing to solve that person's problems. So yeah, I definitely think if you can even test yourself at the end of writing something and go through and count how many we's and ours you've used versus you, and see if you can switch that around some way, that's a really good check.
Great, excellent. Bobby Lee's just saying, excellent presentation, Jen and Beck. Thank you for your time and expertise. Mercia says, thank you, that was one of the best presentations I've seen on comms marketing. I'd have to agree there.
Thank you.
Beck says that was awesome. James Farrell just says, Beck mentioned that every organisation should have a tone of voice guide. Is that a standalone document, and what does it look like?
Well, that's a good question. It can vary. I think I haven't seen a standard format for that. Sometimes they're called brand books. Sometimes they're called brand voice guides. Sometimes they're tone of voice guides. And we've skipped over the nuances around voice versus tone of voice, because that's a nightmare in itself out there in the marketing comms world. But generally what we would put into a guide is the more simplistic, usable parts. So I see a lot of guides that they do a lot of persona work, and that can be really, really helpful. But we tend to look at client motivation. So we'll start with actually doing a bit of a target audience breakdown, but more about what is motivating them to come to, say, that organization, that website for your solution or service. And then we look at what our personality, so what the organization's personality is, and we look at then marrying how you're going to create that tone. So how are you going to take that personality and how are you going to take those audience concerns or motivating factors and create a tone that then can be applied to meet those. And we'll often use about 4, am I right, Jen? We'll try and keep it quite simple. You can list a million tone words, but I find that the more you have, the less helpful it's going to be. So we'll come down to something like a set of 4 that we then break into smaller, more actionable tips. So Jen, I might throw over to you for an example, because I know you've done a little bit of work recently on one where...
Generally, what we find is really helpful in a tone of voice guide is, first of all, if there's going to be a word describing tone, it's really helpful to have synonyms for that word, because the same word doesn't mean the same thing to all of us. So a number of synonyms. So like if you're going to say something like confident, we might put some other words around like that. So like we might be like confident, they might be bold, but not arrogant, things like that. So it's about putting some words to make that a little bit clearer. We include a couple of points about why that's so important to the brand and what that actually means for both the brand and the audience. And then we usually put some examples in about what that actually sounds like as well. So and that often looks like, we write like this, not like this, so that you can, and if it doesn't have that level of detail, I think sometimes it's quite unhelpful for a writer because it just doesn't go right down to that sort of tangible, oh, I can see it in action level. Yeah. But yeah, and at that simplest format to help a writer, a tone of voice guide might only be, 2 to 4 pages long. So it could sit in a bigger 30-page branding document, or it could be something much, much smaller, depending on what you're looking for. Yeah.
Excellent. That's great. Excellent answers, guys. I just got a question here from Paxton from the Lung Foundation Australia. We often find we have multiple CTAs for a campaign because we communicate with many different audiences across a number of disease areas. Do you have any advice on prioritising and simplifying for greater impact? Often we'll include multiple CTAs in one small piece of comms, e.g. a social post.
Yeah. So it is pretty common to see 2 CTAs. That's a really common approach. But even when 2 CTAs are used, you usually have a CTA that as an organisation, is your preferred option. So, and often it allows your audience to take 2 paths. So you have one that's more of a direct and bold action, and one that allows them more to simply learn more or discover more. So it's for the person who's a little bit more hesitant. Beyond that, I definitely agree that it's pretty problematic because your reader definitely will be confused about what they should do, and you risk them doing nothing by having more than one CTA. If campaigns are really quite complex in that regard, I think it does come back to that planning step and figuring out really specifically what each piece of communication is doing, who it's talking to, and then what you think the most appropriate action is for that audience in that location and context. So you do have to make some decisions, I think.
Excellent. Mercia just is asking if tone of voice is applied properly, and as the presenter mentioned, using synonyms on digital platform also helps with SEO. So, it's early in the morning. Have you got any comments around that, maybe with SEO? It was a bit more of a statement.
Sure. I mean, definitely the exercise potentially of doing your tone of voice is going to help you with, and the synonyms will help you with word choice and things like that. But more probably in the world of SEO, there are other considerations you definitely need to be paying attention to, which is, how competitive your keywords are and what your customers are actually searching for. So it might be a useful way to kind of start looking at what's going to go on a page, but yeah, you'd have to then weigh it up against some of the other parameters.
I think it's interesting because I think it's that thing about communication being so personal, and in whether you're searching for something on Google or trying to explain a tone of voice, in a lot of our communication, synonyms are really helpful. And we certainly use them even just in the copy that we write to state something in one way, and then later on to reframe it a little bit to either build understanding or to help a reader who the first time kind of went, no, still don't get that, particularly with a really complex or technical topic. Yeah.
Excellent. I've got a question myself. When it comes to writing to different age brackets, have you got sort of any approach with that, like our generation, someone a bit older compared to like a millennial?
Yes, definitely. We didn't go into our actual process, I suppose, once we actually pick up the tools and start actually writing. But there's quite a lot of research that we do where we dig into, I suppose it depends if it's, if we're looking at talking to a millennial, we'll actually do a lot of digging into Pinterest, forums, we'll look at trending brands for those, for that sort of generation. We'll even look at visuals and design that is resonating, because that'll inform our content structure. So I think it is really important to kind of deep dive into your audience. And we've had ones where we were targeting talking to children, and we have a lot at the moment where we're working with people who are living with dementia. And so the tone of voice that we use really has to be respectful to the generational differences with language. Yeah, you can get away with a whole bunch of different stuff with, I think it's Gen Z now, versus if you're talking to somebody in the 80s. So yeah, it's really important to do that work.
I'll mention this book actually. This is Because Internet. Have you seen this, Bruce?
No, it looks great.
So I had a good read of this when we were writing for Gen Z, and what was really interesting in this was just how our customs with the way we communicate. So as an example, just a really simple one, is that Generation Z, in their informal communication, they use punctuation rarely in, say, text messages to each other. So for Generation Z, punctuation represents some sort of seriousness, like, someone's annoyed at me, there's actually meanings behind the punctuation. But if you're talking to someone who is older, a lack of punctuation would look disrespectful. So when we're looking at conversational copy, even those kind of insights, really understanding the nuances of what's normal for those age groups, yeah, very, very interesting. And we applied that in a project for mental health for a Gen Z audience, where our copy format does use a lot of irregular lines, a lot of sort of what would look like incomplete sentences, less punctuation, things like that. Yeah.
No capitals.
Yeah, limited capitals. Yep.
Yeah.
Wow. And just the name of that book again, it was Because...
So this is Because Internet, and the author is Gretchen McCulloch, and it's, understanding how language is changing. So it sort of sounds like it might be mostly about like how language is now, but she does a lot of comparisons to what that, how that compares to, say, an older audience. And she links it also to those customs of a handwritten letter versus online forums and things like that. Yeah,
excellent. Well, that's great. We've got 2 minutes left on the clock, so I'll have to wrap things up. But thank you again so much, Beck and Jen. Just a fantastic morning. So many takeaways for us today. If you would like to reach out to these wonderful ladies, you can do that at storyflight.com.au. And they'll be sure to help you out in any way that you need some assistance. And as mentioned, if you just go to digitalforgood.com.au to add your email address to our mailing list, we'll send out a recording from today and also the slides. And just a little plug for our next meetup on October the 14th. We've got Nigel Harris, who's a fundraising lifetimer, who's got 40 years worth of fundraising experience. He's going to be sharing on fundraising leadership, so look out for that one. Thank you again, guys, from Storyflight. That was just an incredible morning. Lots to chew on and go to work and work on those things today. Thank you, everyone, for coming along. Hope you enjoyed the morning. If there's anything we can do to help you as a community, please reach out, and have a great day, everybody.
Thanks, Bruce.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.